Great. I think so, Kathy and Amory. Technically, we're all good to go. Um, everything's being recorded that's supposed to be. And sorry, I said Kathy. I meant Kaylin. Um, is there anything technically that we need to address before we dive in?
I guess the first quick question for you, Scott, is do you want to share your screen or would you like us to share the screen for you?
I think I'll do the screen share. That gives me the ability to just move back and forth a little more easily, if that's okay with you, Amory and Kaylin.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. I saw Liam on a moment ago. Oh, there he is. Liam, you're. Again, I just want to check. I want to get the signal that we're all good, where everyone's here that needs to be here, and then we can do some introductions and that kind of thing. So, just looking for that.
Yeah, everybody that should be in this room, I think, is in here by now. So I think we're good to get started.
Okay. All right. Well, then, thank you, and good morning, Tanze, and welcome to everyone who's here. Many of you are not on camera. That is your choice. I want to honor that. I would just then, when we get into an interactive portion of the conversation, I'll need you to signal virtually by a raised hand or whatever it is you would like to do in that regard. And I will do my best to recognize people. I'll start by way of an introduction, and I want to acknowledge where I'm coming from. I put it in the chat, but I also want to acknowledge that for everyone here, and it is different, given that we could be from all over the world, let alone all over Canada or British Columbia or anywhere on Turtle Island, I suppose. So my name is Scott Siemens. I am a federal labor relations mediator. I do some private practice work, but primarily I work for an umbrella organization housed within the Government of Canada's Department of Justice that provides internal conflict resolution support for government departments. So I work for the Canada Revenue Agency and the RCMP and Indigenous and Northern Affairs and the long list of public health agency, all these other organizations. My primary client happens to be the Canada Revenue Agency, but I work for a number of others. I am a descendant of both settler and Indigenous heritage. It doesn't look like that if you look at me, but if you saw my sister, you would see someone that looks very different than me. Obviously, I picked up my father's genetics much more than my mother's, which is where my Indigenous heritage comes from. I'm coming to you from the the community of Kanukama, which is Indian Reserve 80A, which is where I live. It is a reserve set aside for traditional lands for the Touchwood, File Hills, Pasqua Tribal Council, and that's where I happen to reside. And I want to acknowledge that I am here as part settler on those lands, and that you all coming from wherever it is you're coming from may be in that same space where you are not on your own traditional heritage territory, but you're coming from someone else's space, and we want to just acknowledge that. It's different than when we're all physically in, as an example, Treaty 4 or whatever that looks like. It's just very different when we're all over the place, but we still want to acknowledge that. So I want to get a sense of where some of you folks are coming from. I understand I wasn't able to be with you yesterday, so I don't have a clear sense of where it is you're coming from. So if you'd like to pop on the screen or unmute yourself and just share verbally or put in the chat, not physically where you're coming from in terms of where you're sitting this very moment, but where you're coming from in terms of why you're interested in this conversation, what it is you do every day that leads you to say, I could benefit from doing this. So if there are people that are interested in just giving me a sense of what it is you're looking for, what it is you think will be helpful for you, I'd love to hear from you. Someone be brave and take themselves off mute and tell us what it is you're hoping to experience today.
Good morning, Scott. My name is Valerie.
Originally from Quebec and then Nation Abenaki, and now I live in British Columbia, DHR manager for Lilwat Nation. My intention and goal today is, conflict resolution is definitely part of conversation, hot topics. So I'm always, taking in everyone's, new ways to do things, and perhaps a new approach I haven't thought about, when these conflicts arise. And then working in a nation, we definitely deal with different dynamic that we would in any other organization. So always happy to learn.
Thank you, Valerie. And so you identified that you work with and lead an HR organization. I've always said human resources is the greatest place to be, except for that human component. If we could just eliminate the humans from that, it'd be amazing.
Yeah.
But
Then I wouldn't have a job.
well, there is that. Thank you, Valerie. Anyone else in terms of what it is that's bringing you here today?
Hi, good morning, Scott. Amory here. I just wanted to quickly jump on and say, as I kind of advance through my career, it's always nice to listen and learn and kind of expand that toolbox. And looking into, manager, director. I sit on 3 boards. I do a lot of work with First Nation communities. My substantive position is in the federal government, so building up those tools, tips, tricks, best practices is always something that's nice to expand my horizon. And I also have 3 young children, and one of them is almost a teenager. So I'm looking to build on some more tips and tricks to help me out there as well.
Well, thank you for that transparency, Amory. This is not going to be a parenting session, but I will tell you that these are ideas and practices that help in all human interaction, even with teenagers, I might add. I raised 2 of those myself, so I have a little bit of context. 1 or 2 others where you might be coming from.
Hi, Scott. My name is Kathy Murphy. I'm the Human Resources Advisor for Fort Nelson First Nation in Northern British Columbia. And conflict resolution it's always a topic. It's always something that that I want to, again, echoing what Amory said, just build the tools that I have in my toolbox. And so if I can learn new skills today, that's fabulous. If there are some wonderful takeaways, that's great. Just anything that that will help us work through, the varying types and levels of conflict that arise in the employer-employee relationship.
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, that those conflicts within the employee-employer relationship is where I work every day, and so I can say I feel some of your pain, and hopefully I can leave you with something that gives you a little bit more insight in that regard. Anyone else want to share before we jump in?
Good morning, Scott. My name is Matthew Louie. I am from Cowichan Tribes, and I am calling from the territory of the Skokomish, Okamel, Pamathquium, and Tsleil-Waututh. I currently work as a consultant for the federal government with DFO specifically, and 33 First Nations. So when we work with such a large group of First Nations, there is sometimes conflict, and especially when we're discussing our $50 million arm's length fund and how to move forward with that. So I think it's like varying degrees of conflict with respect to priorities and needs for each community. But when we're trying to make the next steps together, there's sometimes conflicts.
Absolutely. And, the title of this session is Why Good People Aren't Immune to Conflict and What We Do About It. So we need to acknowledge that, Matthew, you're describing a perfect scenario. Lots of great people, lots of fantastic ideas, but a perceived finite amount of resource. And so then conflict sometimes emerges, right? And
Yes,
and there you find yourself in the middle of trying to navigate all of that. So,
exactly.
well, I feel for you, brother.
Thank you.
Well, let's get started. And Amory, I know you're off screen right now, but if you can hear me, I wonder if you can just help me in terms of a time check. If you would, or Kaylin, whomever, just give me a reminder when we maybe have about 10 minutes left. I think we're going to the top of the hour, if I understood correctly, or just after the top of the hour is what we were shooting for.
Yeah, we're going to 10:15, Scott, so I can give you a little heads up at 5 after.
Yeah, maybe a heads up right at 10, because I want to give a little bit of time for Q&A just in case. So
Not a problem.
that'll give me that space. Okay, folks, I am going to share my screen. Well, I'd like to share my screen. Now I can't even find where that option is. Well, this is embarrassing. I use this all the time. Oh, there it
Should
is.
be bottom in
Yep,
the middle,
yep.
green button.
Got it. Got it. All right, we're getting there. Can someone tell me what they see on their screen right now? This doesn't look right.
I've got your deck pulled up, Scott. Conflict in the workplace and community.
Yep. Is that what everyone sees?
Yep, looks good.
Great. Okay. All right. So what I want to do then, I'm thrown off because usually there's a red line around that particular screen. So I'm not sure why it's not showing that today. But anyway, and maybe Amory, I'll just lean on you a little bit here to make sure that people are seeing the advanced screen and that kind of thing. So what we do want to do today is talk about conflict in the workplace and community, and why good people aren't immune and what to do about it. So Amory, just checking, are you seeing something that now says workshop overview? Got it. Great. Thanks. We're good to go. So we want to talk about understanding the nature of conflict, get into some theory, want to look at, well, how might we analyze conflict? If I think back to something that Matthew said, well, if you find yourself in the place of having to figure out, well, what's the conflict all about? How did we end up here? It doesn't automatically seem that we might be, that it would be immediately evident that we understand what the conflict is about, because there's all these other pieces going on. We want to access the conflict toolbox. People like Valerie and Kathy talked about, well, if there would be some takeaways, we want to do that, and then do a little bit of reflection on what does this mean for us. I will say that in the repository of documents, and I think it was Elsa that I sent stuff to, and Amory, maybe you could provide some guidance here. I sent some documents, some tools, some tangible quote unquote handouts. If we were all physically in a room, I would hand you pieces of paper, but so this is my best attempt at doing that. But they're in that repository there, and I'll be referring to those, and I'll bring those up on screen at the when we get to the end, so people have a sense of that. But just so you know where we're going today. All right, let's get into this. So, University of Hong Kong PhD Yash Guy says conflict is one of the most powerfully positive factors for change in society. Without conflict, we would have stagnation. And I don't know if you've ever thought about conflict as a powerfully positive factor. If we were in a room right now, I would ask this question, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, that we're in this virtual room. Can anyone raise their hand if they were in conflict already today? Now, I'm not going to ask you to do that. It's a rhetorical question, because I'll tell you, you were. You were in conflict with your alarm clock when it went off this morning, and you felt like, oh, just 10 more minutes. You might have been in conflict with your children when it was, okay, so who's going to clean up the breakfast dishes? There could have been a number of conflicts with respect to how you're engaging in your world already today. But the reality is that conflict isn't always destructive. Conflict isn't always adversarial. Conflict can be, as Professor Guy says, conflict can actually be productive. It can be positive. It can be engaging. And that's how we want to look at conflict today. How do we take this thing that society, that peoples all over the world have identified as ugly and messy and destructive and decapacity oriented, and how do we say, well, what can we do about that to make that work? That's where we want to go. Another great quote that I love from, I worked with Dr. Bloomfield when I taught at the University of Ulster, and he said, and this is over a decade ago, he said this. Increasingly, internal conflict rooted in ideas of human identity and often expressed with frightening intensity is the major threat to stability and peace at the individual, local, and international levels. Think about that for a moment. Internal conflict, the stuff that I'm going through, that I'm wrestling with, rooted in my ideas of human identity, of who I am and what I need, expressed with frightening intensity. Look anywhere in the world. Look in your home community. Look south to us in the United States. Look east to us to Northern Ireland, to Palestine, anywhere. And you'll see this manifestation. You'll see that this expression, this conflict rooted in human identity is a major threat to stability and peace. And I think if we just ponder that for a moment, we'll understand what Dr. Bloomfield was talking about. I taught with him at the University of Leeds, Bradford, doing some peace building work in the early 2000s. Um, and I just really resonated with how he identified so clearly that it's so much of what's within us that gets expressed out and becomes really frightening. So to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, I want to share with you a Pearls Before Swine cartoon. Amory, I see you nodding, so I'm assuming you're seeing this. That's great. I love Pearls Before Swine, and so there's going to be 4 cartoon strips I'll show you through the course here. So just have a quick read here. So if you're in HR, and I know some of you are, you might be thinking, man, if only I had a mallet of understanding, if I could just get these people to smarten up and understand what it is they need to do, it would make my life so much easier. But of course, the whole idea about a stick is that we might use it for less than helpful purposes. And well, what does that really accomplish for us? We'll come back to the pig and the rat throughout this presentation. Let's start with a little bit of conflict analysis. If we think about all conflict as coming to us in terms of the analytical component in this kind of 3-legged stool or this 3-cornered hat or this triangle or however you want to imagine these 3 pieces, I want to posit with you that we look at it in these 3 naming functions. There's the situation, there's attitude, and there's behavior. And each of us comes into a conflict environment at one of these places. We're confronted with a scenario. We're confronted with a specific behavior. We're confronted with an attitude. Especially if you're in that HR leadership role, you're seeing likely all 3 of these at various points. You'll notice that the lines that move between these 3 are interchangeable and move back and forth. And so I'll ask you to just stop and think for a moment. Well, what might that be? How might attitudes and situations be reciprocal in that the conflict theme moves back and forth between those? Or go over to the situation and behavior. How does that reciprocity, how does that movement back and forth give expression? Or finally, between attitudes and behavior. Think for a moment if I harbor an attitude towards, oh, I don't know, all HR people. That HR folks are unproductive and they're unnecessary, and we really don't need them in order to make our organization, our nonprofit, our business, whatever it is. They're really just a drain on resources. We just don't need HR people. Sorry for all of you HR folks, but that includes me. If that's my attitude, how might that affect my behavior towards an HR person? How might that lend itself to situations or scenarios where I engage with an HR person or I engage beyond that in my community? And if the community is a workplace, if that's what we're talking about here, and I have disdain, my attitude towards HR is it's unnecessary, how might that affect the way I actually engage with people in the situations I find myself? Let's move to a different part of that triangle. Let's go to behaviors. If I behave badly, well, again, we'll use a workplace scenario. If I behave inappropriately or badly or disrespectfully in a particular engagement, what could that do in terms of creating this bigger situation, this bigger scenario, this meta narrative in terms of creating toxicity in the workplace? What is that going to do about creating negative or dismissive or toxic attitudes that I might engender, but that also might come up with other people? I think you can see where I'm going here, that in every conflict analysis, there are three pieces that we must look for. What's the actual environment, the situation, the scenario? What's the behavior? And what are the attitudes that undergird that? And so, as you know, again, for those of you that are in kind of human resource leadership roles, or any leadership role for that matter, because you're dealing with people, when you're leading, you're dealing with people. Think about looking at this three-legged stool approach to analyzing what's going on and using that as the foundation for what you want to do in terms of discerning how to move forward. I want to talk about three approaches to conflict analysis. Three approaches to analyzing conflict. There is an adversarial approach. So, I don't know. Amy's an executive director at some organization. He sees a conflict and he just simply says, nope, I will stamp this out. I will take a directive adversarial approach. I will, by edict, declare that there shall be no conflict, that this is now resolved. That's probably great if you're, the queen of the world, or in a dictatorship where you get to make all the rules and everyone bows to your every whim and desire, but that generally doesn't work for us. It's one approach, but it's probably not a practical approach. I will say that the most effective way to resolve conflict is simply to stamp it out. So there, it's resolved. But that is not a long-term solution. Conflict has a way of bubbling up again because we haven't dealt with the issues. So there's the reflective approach to analyzing conflict. How might we consider what it is that's going on? How do we determine what we need to investigate further? How do we determine who needs to be a part of the conversation? How do I, as a leader, make the determinations so that I can analyze the conflict? I think that's certainly a better step than the adversarial approach. So rather than just declaring that all conflict is now over, I can actually sit back and I can reflect on what needs to happen here. I, as a leader, what do I need to do here? Looking at the three-legged stool, the situation, the behavior, um, the reflection, the analysis. What do I need to do about that? But I want to invite you to consider taking this third step, to take it to the very base level and consider an integrative approach to analyzing conflict. Amory, you shared earlier that you've got some children in your home, and some of them are emerging on their teen years, and it is so tempting as a parent to simply say, "Do what I say, and don't question me, and don't look at how I behave. Just do what I tell you, and do it because I'm dad." That is a really tempting approach, and in our most exasperated moments, I'll confess, it's an approach I used. Not something I'm particularly proud of, but there are moments in my parenting history where, you know, I maybe didn't shine as brightly as I would have liked to. And I take that very directive approach. But if I go into this integrative space and I begin to analyze the conflict by inviting the parties to the conflict into the conversation, into the reflection, I begin to gain understandings that otherwise would not have been known to me. So again, I'll use, whether it's Matthew's example or Valerie's or Kathy's or any of yours, where you're a almost a third party. Maybe there's a conflict going on between two parties looking for funding, or two staff persons in an organization that you're in leadership with. Um, there's this conflict going on, and you're looking to analyze, well, what's going on here? So, is this a policy issue we need to address? Is this a contractual issue? Like, what is it that's going on? If you think through, well, adversarial is not likely to work. Reflective is better, but doesn't give me the whole picture. If I take an integrative approach, if I actually invite the parties in conflict into the dialogue to help analyze what's going on here, as a leader, I'll have much better insight, and the parties themselves will begin to understand that they are part of the process. They're not just part of the conflict, they're also part of the solution. And if any of you have ever been in a conflict, if any of you have ever participated in mediation, you will, I would hope you would understand, and you would absolutely agree that being part of the solution building process will make you much, much more committed to the outcomes, to maintaining whatever the solution is. If I was part of creating the solution, I am much more likely to be committed to adhering to the solution. And so this is the benefit as you as leaders are thinking through, how do I analyze the conflict? How do I get my head around what I need to do as a leader, as an HR professional, as a CEO, as a director, whatever it is, wherever you find yourself at, if I can think through to get to the place, well, I'd like to take an integrative approach that will actually help you both understand and to begin to help people move forward. I'm going to pause for a second just to register the fact that there's construction going on beside my house here, and they're pouring concrete today. So if you're going to hear some loud noises in the background, I apologize for that. Amory, you got a lovely assistant there, and I think it's delightful. Hi there. So let's look at what the key factors are in analyzing conflict. If we get into this integrative approach, which is where I'm encouraging you to consider establishing yourself as you think about, how do I analyze conflict as the first step to conflict management. A couple of key factors here. The actors. Who are the stakeholders? Both the ones that seem to be present. So we'll go back to this HR analogy of being in a workplace, and you've got employee, employer, and all that kind of stuff going on. There will likely present one or two or three or four key actors, the people who are tangibly and visibly in conflict. I want you to hear this, that there are almost always more actors in the background. There are what we in the mediation community refer to as the ghosts of the process. These might be other employees who are in the background, maybe feeding the narrative, feeding the conflict. There might be someone who retired a number of weeks or months or years ago where there's some legacy there, and that person is still having influence. Let's look at a family scenario. Maybe you've got, I don't know, a family separation. And now you have the biological mom and dad working on the issue, but you've also got their new spouses or maybe some new grandparents. And these are all what we refer to as the ghosts. They are stakeholders. They are critical to be factored in terms of understanding the conflict, but they're not physically present. They're not actually at the face of the conflict. And so that's one thing that we have to consider. What are the issues? So, what are the stated causes of the conflict? It's about, well, I was doing a session not dissimilar from this yesterday with another workplace group, and I used the analogy of, well, I bring my lunch to work every day and I put my paper bag in the fridge and I have my name written on it. And every day for the last 3 weeks, when I go to eat my lunch, it's gone. That's a conflict. That's going to create workplace tension. If any of you have ever found yourself in that place, you'll fully understand what I'm talking about there. People get pretty possessive about their lunches. But then the question is, well, is it really about the lunch? if as a HR manager, as a leader in your organization, and I come to you and I say, hey, somebody's stealing my lunch every day. Like this, I am just livid. This has got to end. And I want the organization to implement some new policies. As a matter of fact, I want the organization to put up a hidden web camera right by the refrigerator because I want to know who's stealing my lunch. And if you said to me as the employee, the disgruntled, the very agitated employee right now, if you said, well, Scott, how much does lunch cost every day? Well, $10. Great. 10 times 5 times 3. Here's $150. You're good to go. Now we get into the sub issues because I'm going to respond by saying, well, no, it's not about the $150. I'm actually feeling disrespected. I'm feeling fearful because I don't know who I can trust in this office anymore. Somebody's out there taking my lunch. And it's actually not about the lunch. If I were to stand up right now and turn sideways, you would see from my physique that I could stand to miss a few lunches. This is not going to hurt me. So it's not about the lunch. So, what are the sub issues for you as a leader as you're thinking through how do I engage with people? How do I analyze the conflict? There is the issue that is presented, and we refer to this in mediation as the position, and we'll come to a slide on that in a moment. That's the position, that's the issue. What I said is my lunch is gone, and I need someone to pay because I'm feeling disrespected, I'm feeling oppressed, I'm feeling somehow abused in this scenario. But the sub issue behind that is really about notions of fears, notions of an interest in a just and safe and fair and collegial workplace. Those are the issues. So when you offer me $150, I go, whoa, 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 but wait a minute. Really, what I want to talk about is how do we create a safe workplace where it's not just that I'm fearful about leaving my lunch in the fridge. Now I don't know if I can trust my coworkers. I don't know if I can trust Vicky or Brianna or Valerie or Heather or I don't know who I can trust in my workplace because it's lunch today. Maybe next week they're taking my shoes or my winter coat or they're disrespecting me in some other way. They're taking my stapler, which although it belongs to the organization, I somehow have a weird attachment to. What's going on here? So to think through when you're doing this conflict analysis, the integrative approach, thinking through what are those sub issues? What are the beliefs, fears, needs, values, agendas, the priorities, the expectations, all of those things that actually don't present themselves at the top of the pyramid. They're kind of below the surface. They're that iceberg that are down below the waterline. The scope, so what's the extent of the conflict and the history? What's happened previously? These are all the things that as a leader of people that you want to be thinking about in terms of how do I analyze the conflict? Just a quick look at assessing the stages of the conflict. Almost all conflicts start out with a human interaction. Is it an in-person conversation? Is it an email exchange? Is it I don't know. I'm not on social media, but maybe it's a Twitter thing or what, but there's some kind of interaction going on. That discussion stage can quickly move to this place of polarization where now it becomes you against me. Okay. It's, you know, it's the lunch provider versus the lunch stealer. And now we're polarized. Now I'm actually beginning to demonize you and you're doing the same thing to me. Then we get into segregation. We're actually building camps. We're building support groups around us. We're creating little communities that take my side versus the people that are on your side. We're literally segregating the community, the workplace, the the faith community, whatever context this is in. And that sometimes, if not addressed, can lead to the destruction stage where I actually don't care about relationship anymore. I don't care about workplace harmony. All I want is for you to experience pain. I actually want you to be harmed. And of course, in so doing, I'm opening myself up to you doing the same thing to me. And and as when I was doing the work in Northern Ireland, as the folks there would say, we actually carry around a backpack full of rocks and I just start throwing rocks. at the other. And I keep throwing them until my backpack's empty, knowing all along that you're throwing rocks at me. And that's that destructive stage that we get into. And of course, that's when families break down, that's when communities break down, that's when workplaces become toxic and absolutely unbearable, impossible to work in. That's when we get to this destruction phase. And so you as a leader, as you're looking at the conflict and the context, have a look, try and understand, where are we? Have we begun? Are we still in discussion? Have we gone through polarization and we're in segregation now? We've literally taken sides, and now are those sides beginning to be destructive towards one another? Because that will inform you as to the intensity of your involvement, of that integrative approach to resolving the conflict. Some of you will be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I put this slide up there because I'm going to reference it to something that Vern Neufeld-Redekop did around human identity needs. But if you took a Psych 101 course at any time in your life, you'll be familiar with this. And this whole idea that our needs are built one on top of the other, from the basic food, water, shelter need, all the way to achieving our potential and self-actualization. Vern Neufeld-Redekop, in his book From Violence to Blessing, um, he talks about a different way to consider Maslow's hierarchy from a human identity need perspective. Remember the quote from Dr. Bloomfield when he talked about increasingly around the world, human identity need based conflict is what's giving rise to global, local, intercommunity conflict. It is a threat to security and peace. And so Redekop posits that in place of Maslow's hierarchy, he would put these: security, yes, I need to feel secure in who I am. Meaning and justice. I need for my world around me to be seen to be fair, to be just, to have meaning for me. That's a need I have as a human being. I have a need for recognition. I need to be recognized not just for who I am, but also for what I contribute to society, for the work I do, for the contributions I make. I need to have some sense of input and control in a workplace environment. I, as an employee, have a need to have some kind of input into the work I do, the type of workplace I engage in. I need some component of control in order for me to feel like my human identity needs are being met. And the last one, and this is this self-actualization piece, I need connection. As much as I might think that human beings are all the problem in human resources, and I might say my life and my work would be so much better if all of these dumb people weren't around me, I actually have a need for connection. I have a need for relationships. I have a need for feedback. Redekop says I have a need for human connection, even though it's those humans that are threatening my human identity needs. And so it's ironic in that sense, and yet it's there. And so if you think about Maslow's hierarchy and put in place Redekop's human identity needs, security, justice, recognition, input, connection, you can look at these human identity needs as one of these factors that we're going to analyze when we look at a conflict. Which so when the lunch is being stolen, when my lunch is being stolen every day for 3 weeks out of the break room refrigerator, which human identity need is being threatened? Probably not security, because as I said, I could stand to miss a few lunches. Input and control, maybe. Meaning and justice. There's a sense of unfairness at play there. Connection. Somehow there's a breach, a breakdown in relationship with one of my coworkers here because someone's taking my lunch. And so from Redekop's position, what we need to look at when we're analyzing conflict on the human component is these things. What's being threatened? Something to think about. And by the way, his book From Violence to Blessing, readily accessible. If you're in if you're in a place of leading human beings, either in an HR capacity or organizational leadership capacity, I highly recommend that book. It's a good, it's not a particularly easy read. It's not light reading, but it's certainly worthwhile. It comes from a more of an academic perspective. Let's go back to the pig and the rat. So behold the mallet of understanding designed to help me amicably resolve disputes with dumb people. How's it work? Well, if you disagree with me, I smash you over the head. Wow, that's got Nobel Prize written over it. Well, snooty sarcasm is not prudent. We can see that maybe when we engage with people, a sarcastic approach may have results that we're not particularly interested in. I want to look at some practical application now. And some questions. And if there are those that would want to offer up your response to any of these questions, they're meant to be a discussion starter, but I want to recognize that we're in this kind of awkward Zoom space. But as you think about what conflict is going on in your community, in your workplace, in your organization, wherever it is you're coming from here, how is conflict manifested? How do we see that? Is there someone that can put something in the chat or pop onto the screen or take yourself off mute and just say, well, how do I recognize conflict in the workplace? What does it actually look like? Matthew, I see you took yourself and put yourself on camera. What does it look like in your environment where you're navigating these negotiations?
Well, this one time when I was working at the First Nations Health Authority, we were having meetings with the managers, and then HR was involved and my union rep. And for one of the last meetings, I asked them if we could have the elder there to support me. And the union rep said that he's never seen HR be so nice to someone, and it was because I had the elder there with us.
So there's those mean HR people again. That's great.
Yeah.
But Matthew, I want to comment on that because having a neutral, unbiased, non-emotionally attached third party is sometimes the best tool we can bring to these engagements, right? Because you're in your emotional space and you're agitated, and the HR person is in their space and they're frustrated, and I don't know, like fill in the blanks. There's all this other stuff. But to have an independent third party, which often is a mediator, an elder, someone who can come into that space and help navigate the conversation in a less inflamed way, right? What a way to help manage the environment.
Yeah, and my cousin is going through some issues with her supervisor and team, and the HR department doesn't seem to be much help in the situation. So I recommended, I said, you should get an elder to come sit in your meetings with you. Like, it helped when I asked for that. And so, like, you can get that cultural support from an elder. And
Absolutely.
he's going to try that.
Yeah. So great advice. And so when you look at, well, how is conflict manifested in the workplace? Well, it manifested in terms of, well, I need to have a conversation with, so using Matthew's example, I've got to have a conversation with HR. Okay, well, there's some tension there. There's some anxiety there. There's maybe some distrust out of some past experiences or whatever that looks like. And so it's manifested in terms of, well, there's some guardedness. I don't know that I'll be heard well. And so that has me anxious. That's how conflict is so often manifested in the workplace. That's how it represents itself. Thank you, Matthew. Anyone else? How have you seen conflict manifested? How does it present itself in your environment, in your community, in your workplace, in your organization, whatever that looks like?
So I work for federal government. So things are very, appear to be very polite and politically correct, and everyone knows the social cues. But what I can say is, in some of my experience, is just picking up on body language and the cues from body language. And you can kind of tell, for me at least, whenever I've been doing, like I've facilitated over 22 Kairos blanket exercises. And that would be where one of the main things, like even before, so I always had an elder from the community. Like I live in Victoria, so I was trying to spread it out amongst the 8 First Nations here in Victoria. And I would have an elder come in to help facilitate, open us up in a good way. We always start with an opening circle and we finish with a closing circle. And in the opening circle, we encourage everyone to share who they are and where they're from and what their ancestry is, because even if you're non-Indigenous, you have an ancestry that you're probably really proud of, and that's okay. You're allowed to be. So anyways, but you could always tell right away those ones where people would say who their ancestry was, and you can always tell there would be someone, one or two always, that would be like, I'm Canadian, and but just that. So you could already tell, like, so there's those certain little cues that I picked up from facilitating these circles that now appear in other ways, in other meetings and such, which it's a little bit harder with virtual, because you don't have that same, you only have their shoulders above, and there's a lot of body language that's communicated from below the waist that we're just not conscious of. So that's where my challenge has been a little bit with moving to the online thing, but there's still some social cues that you kind of pick up on, but it's only through experience, I think, that you become more and more aware of it. And then I think too is just words are really important, and you can really pick up a lot when you really pay attention to language, and it can be subtle things like them using they instead of us or we, because it's kind of showing you that they already feel separated or isolated or whatnot. So yeah, anyways, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and what you're describing, just language, them, us, him, rather than we, right?
Yeah.
It's already this segregation. We're already creating camps, right? So thank you very much, Brenna. And so I think what we're hearing in these examples is that conflict can look differently, and yet what it comes back to is still rooted in these human identity needs. What is it in me that's being threatened? Is it my security? Is it this notion of fairness? Is this human connection? What is it? And then the next questions that as I have on the screen there is like, so how well equipped are you to address conflict? I think Matthew's story is so informative for us that, well, I might not be well equipped, but I know where I can get resources. My third bullet point there, what resources can you or have you accessed? And, and Matthew's example is just such a great example of that. Let's continue on. Here's another pearls before swine. You can have a quick read of that. And yes, the mallet of understanding might not be very applicable or amicable, and it has consequences. Ron Sider, in his work at Eastern University in just outside of Philadelphia, came up with this kind of grid around this whole notion of how do we analyze and then how do we apply approaches to conflict resolution. And so if you can see on the screen here, and hopefully you can see my cursor going back and forth there, if we place a high emphasis on the task, we're likely to take a very directive or driving or assertive approach to the conflict resolution. Because for us, the conflict is about getting the task done, the job, the assignment, whatever it is. But if I take a high value of relationship, and I say the conflict really is all about the relationship, I might take a very accommodating approach. I might say, well, no, okay, fine. If that's how you need it to be, I'm good with that. It's, really, I value the relationship more than the task. Of course, if I'm not concerned about task or relationship, then I can simply avoid the conflict, which that's a legitimate approach. I can just forget about it and walk away. But if both task and relationship are important, which is almost always the case, I find myself in this central compromising space, or even better, a collaborating space. We often talk about, well, we can compromise on this. The thing about compromise is that it means I'm giving something up. I might be getting something, and you might be getting something, but we're both also giving something up. Whereas collaborating could lead us to that what's, euphemistically referred to as the win-win or the win-win-win. How do we all get what we're looking for? And this whole idea that we have to hold in high regard both the task, so the situation, the thing, and the person, that is the relationship. I need to hold both of those in high regard. And so, how do I do that well? Well, collaboration is where we want to go. We talked about this positions and taking positions in terms of, well, what do we see? What's the evidence, the manifestation of the conflict, and all the stuff that's beneath that we can't see. Imagine that, this is the iceberg, and you've no doubt seen this many times. But the reminder is that all of these things that are below what we see. I come to you with a conflict about the lunch situation, and what I bring to you is the lunch situation. What you don't see at first, until you really get into this integrative approach to resolving the conflict, is personality, is emotion, is my interests, my needs, my self-esteem, my hidden expectations, my past, all that stuff that I'm bringing. Maybe this is the second time that somebody's been stealing my lunch. Maybe this goes back to something that happened in my childhood or whatever, and it's a trigger for me. All of that is below the waterline. And until you take that integrative approach as a leader of human beings, until you take that integrative approach and invite people to become part of the conversation, none of this will be evident to you. And it's so critical in terms of understanding, of analyzing the conflict and coming up with some approaches. Just some basic things. And I think Amory put the link to this place where these other documents are held. And in that repository, I don't have the tech language for it, but in that place you'll find two things that I've posted there. One is 10 tips for having successful conflict conversations. So just some basic stuff. And the first tip is face the issue. Let's not do the ostrich thing where we stick our head in the sand. We got to face the issue. We're going to have the conversation. Okay. So to take an interest or understanding based approach, raise the issue. Dig below the waterline. Ask the questions. Ask open-ended questions about, well, what's behind this? What's important to you about this? What else is going on here for you? Discover the interests. Then look into generating some options. Well, what might meet that need? Okay, so the need for you isn't really lunch. Okay, the last 3 weeks have gone by. So if I bring you, 15 bag lunches tomorrow, that really doesn't solve the problem. So that's not the need. The need is to feel like you're not being disrespected, that your personal space with respect to your lunch bag isn't being violated. So that's the need. Oh, okay. Well, what's that born out of? Well, that's born out of a sense of fairness and respect and dignity and all those kinds of things. So now we can get into, well, oh, great. So the option of my bringing you 15 bag lunches really isn't a helpful option at all. What might you need? And if we had the other person here, the person who maybe I don't know, maybe they thought you had an agreement where you were bringing them lunch every day for 3 weeks. I don't know. What's going on for them? What might that look like for them? Again, an integrative approach to discovering interests and generating options. And then, of course, once you've got options on the table, then you can come to some agreements. Just some real practical steps. And again, go into that shared folder, whatever that thing is, and look at that document, 10 tips for successful conflict conversations.
Scott, just to give you a heads up, we're at 10 o'clock.
Great. Thank you, Amory. When you're raising the issue, separate the people from the problem. These are some real basic practical things. But, as Matthew pointed out, when I'm in the conflict, when I'm representing the employer or the organization or the funding body or whatever it is in the conflict, my emotions sometimes get the best of me as well, and I might not be as clear or as focused as I want to be. So start by reminding yourself we're here to address the problem. It's not about the people. Even if you think for a moment that the people are the problem, and of course they are, there wouldn't be a problem without people, but to separate who they are from what they've done. Remember that triangle. Behavior is just one element. There's also attitude and there's situation. Okay. And so to try and separate the person from the problem, the human from the issue. I think it's important that we do acknowledge people's emotions. We we try and be empathic. We try and demonstrate empathy by imagining what it might be like to be in their space, and we acknowledge their emotions. That does not mean we're entering their emotional state. We're just acknowledging. We want to listen, and we want to demonstrate that we're listening. We want to acknowledge. We want to paraphrase. We want to maybe reframe when we need to. We want to demonstrate that we're really actively listening and engaged to the individual. And again, if we were physically in a room, I would ask right now everyone to stand up. So you can do that if you want or not, but you can imagine standing up in a room. And then I would say, so where you are now by default is a place of judgment. So as human beings, we're asked to, in nanoseconds every day, make judgments on a million different scenarios. My stomach's grumbling, that must mean I'm hungry. There's someone at the door, that must mean I have to go get it. There's an email I have to respond to, so now I'm agitated. There are a million external influences on our life every day that require us to make a judgment, require us to make a decision. And so we do that really well. We are, as human beings, we're really good at that, making judgments, making assessments, making determinations. But I would ask you to stand up and say that you are now standing in a place of judgment, which is your natural state. And then I would ask you to take one step to the left or one step to the right. And I would say, now you're standing in a place of curiosity. You're curious about this new space you're in. You see the world just a bit differently, from a bit of a different angle. You're standing on a different patch of dirt or carpet or flooring or wherever it is you happen to be. But this whole idea of being able to emotionally and intellectually move, to do a virtual representation of a physical movement, that I am now consciously moving from my predisposed place of judgment, because that's how I'm wired, that's how as a species we're created, to a place of curiosity. And what might that do in terms of my inviting people into that integrative approach to analyzing and solving conflict? And then lastly, to turn confrontation, so this, into collaborative problem solving, if we can achieve this. And the whole idea is that when we raise these issues, this is the posture that we want to inhabit. You should be very aware of the 3Ds: deny, defend, deflect, because you do this all the time. I do it. We all do it. When confronted with something that makes me feel uncomfortable, my go-tos are any of these. I deny, I defend, or I deflect. And again, that just makes me human. That makes me a person who walks this planet. We're all part of that environment. And so when the person puts up a defense, when the person deflects the situation, when they deny their involvement, understand that they're doing exactly what they're created to do. This is how we behave when first confronted. Okay. Dr. David Augsburger, in his book Caring Enough to Confront, coined this term. What if rather than confronting, we could try care-fronting? That is, taking a caring, compassionate approach, that I care enough about you as a person that I'm raising this issue with you. It demonstrates complete lack of care for you if I let you walk around all day with spinach in your teeth, or like your shirt hanging out, or I don't know, some other example that I simply don't care enough about you to actually bring something to your attention. Well, care fronting, even done most caringly, can still result in these 3Ds. And so just know that. Just know that. When we're separating positions and interests, I just want to briefly touch on a couple of things here. Just know that positions, the things that I say on the surface, are very polarizing, whereas the interests are integrative. If my position is someone took my lunch 3 weeks in a row, I need reparation. Whereas if the interest is, well, I need a workplace that's more respectful. One creates camps, creates polarities, the other creates integration. And so just know that behind every position is some kind of human identity need, some interest that holds the seeds of solution in there. Just understand that a position is simply the person giving voice to what that deeper seated interest is. And that's where solutions are found. Here we go again. Well, little buddy, I've got bad news. I need to smash you over the head. I didn't do anything. I know, but one day you might, and I can't take that chance. Well, if you're going to do that, maybe I should get my own mallet. And hence we have the preemptive strike that some nations around the world talk about. So the last thing here I want to talk to you about is, what do I do when I first hear that there's a conflict unfolding? What do I do to arrange the first meeting? What do I do when the meeting is set and I need to prepare? And I think what I want to leave you with here again is one of these other documents that I have in that repository called conflict conversation aids. And I'll pull this up on my screen. You won't be able to see it, but it talks about how do we have these powerful conversations? Well, I need to know that every conversation has two potential outcomes. It can have a positive impact or a negative impact. There's no middle ground. If we're going into this conflict conversation, there is no neutrality anymore. Okay. So I can either have a positive impact or a negative one. All right. And so I need to choose what I'm going to do. I need to understand that there are communication barriers. I need to understand that there's environmental barriers and psychological barriers and cultural and organizational barriers to every conversation. These are all filters through which all of my stuff goes through. And I need to understand that according to our sociologists, they'll tell us that nearly half of all communication gets lost in the transmission. And I'm going to suggest to you that when it's not face-to-face verbal, that number rises. More than half of my message is easily lost when I do it by email or text or whatever it is. And so just to understand that when a conflict is unfolding and I'm going into these places, I need to have these understandings. Please, again, avail yourself of that resource in that space that's made for us. So when I arrange the first meeting, well, I want to go from that place of judgment to that place of curiosity. What do I do? How do I move myself? How do I invite the other parties to move themselves from a place of judgment, which is their natural created default, to a place of curiosity where I'm open, where I'm asking, well, that's not normal for Scott. Why would you behave that way? What was going on for you? And then once the meeting is set and I need to prepare, what are the things I do? I think Matthew gave us kind of the best advice we possibly could hear. I make myself sensitive to the fact that I might need a third party to engage. Folks, that's where I want to bring us to. These are the kinds of ideas, the conflict analysis, the practical application tools. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And so I think that should be gone now. Amory, I'm looking for a clue from you. It's gone now. Okay. So I want to just pause and ask any questions, anything at all that you might have a question about, and then I'm going to leave you with one last little a tidbit, another resource for you to go to. Anyone, any thoughts, any reflections?
Yeah, I see a hand up from Delbert Good. So Delbert, if you want to just unmute yourself, you can turn your video on if you feel the need or want to do that as well, but the floor is yours.
Good morning. I'm quite sorry I missed yesterday's session. I'm just joining in today. This is quite eye-opening. I'm from Gidneyal, a small community up north. We have our small staff has been working all the way through COVID. We work on an alternate basis, some in the morning, some in the afternoon, and most recently, for about the last 2 months, we've been back in the office. We've done our best to provide for the community and fulfill the mandate of this council. Per se, we don't have a HR department, but we do our best to handle any conflicts that do come up within the community. I guess lately it seems to be a bit more because, as you know, everybody basically suffers from cabin fever when it comes to COVID. It seems like the hackles have come up more lately than they have through the 15 to 16 months of everybody's been through this. And right now we're having a hard time surviving. As the presenter said, everybody breaks up into little groups and away we go. It seems like it's our staff that is the target of every conflict there is, and some of it starts with in our own leadership, and it's that's the hard part of it, on how to address this and keep moving. I appreciate the presentation, and if I can get more from the presenter on where to find or look into types of conflict resolution, I'd really appreciate it. I thank you for your time, and like I said, I'm sorry I missed yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Delbert. I think Scott may have accidentally clicked the leave breakout room as it popped up there, but we're going to be pushed back into the main room in the next 20 seconds. Delbert, we'll make sure that we resend the link out to you for Hightail so that you can download all of these resources as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.